So, hi and welcome to this webinar exploring why esports is important and how AR, VR, and gamification can help. Esports is huge, and we'll hear more about this from our guests during the course of the next hour. But it's massive, and when we think about the transformative potential of AR, VR as well, and how gamification strategies can enhance learning outcomes, we're going to look at the insights and actionable advice from our two guests on how we can think about integrating these cutting-edge approaches into educational settings. My first guest this evening is Tom Dore. Tom is the Vice President at the British Esports Federation. That's the UK's national body for esports. He's recognised as a global leader in esports and education. He led the establishment of the British Esports Student Champs, a tournament that sees 700 plus school and college teams competing online each week, and the development of Pearson's BTEC in esports, which has been studied by 10,000 students in 2020. He's also leading the development of coaching and safeguarding standards in esports, and he's also an experienced teacher, having taught for 19 years across state, independent, and alternative provision schools. Our second guest is Jaime Donally, former guest on NetSupport's webinars, so we're really looking forward to hearing from her again. She's the founder of ARVRinEDU and Global Maker. She began her career as a maths teacher and later moved into instructional technology. Her desire to build relationships has created opportunities to collaborate with students and educators around the world. She provides staff development and training on emerging technologies as an EdTech consultant, and her adventures include the Global Maker Day and the ARVR in Edu community events. She's also an author. I learned a few moments ago that ISTE are her publishers, and she's a speaker on the practical use of immersive technology in the classroom. It gives me great pleasure to welcome both Jaime and Tom to the webinar. Welcome to you both. Thank you for joining me for this conversation. Thank you.
Pleasure. No problems.
Thank you.
Now, did I miss anything out on your bios there?
Not from me. That was great. Thank you very much. It's always strange when you hear that read out when you're still in and around the place, so to speak.
Yeah, although the unwritten thing is that Tom does not play Fortnite. If you're looking for his game attack, he will not be sharing it with you. And given his experiences, and which are kind of similar to mine, I won't be sharing my Fortnite tag either. Although you might better work it out if you know who I am. Listen, thank you both, Tom and Jaime, for joining me today. To kick things off, I gave a bit of your sort of background there, and you're both former teachers. But could you sort of share a bit about your journeys into the realms of esports and AR, VR, and education? How did you sort of fall down that path? Because I know you won't have sort of sat down 20 years ago and thought, I know what I'll be doing in 20 years' time. It wouldn't have been that. So what sparked your passion for these areas, and how has your work evolved over time? Jaime, if I could come to you first, please.
Okay, sure. Honestly, it was just being a classroom teacher. I think I've always been into how technology can support our students and the way that they learn. So that was a passion there already. Was seeing augmented reality for the first time, seeing, I don't know, just like the spark of the possibilities and saying, what is possible here that we can do in our classrooms? How should this look so different than what we've approached in the past? And how do our students need to be prepared for this? So seeing AR initially was kind of that beginning phase for me. It started sharing about it. Not too long after, of course, seeing virtual reality really tying in there, and seeing both really having different opportunities, but really kind of leveraging that immersive technology as a whole. So that was where my passion first began.
Great stuff. Thank you, Jaime. How about yourself, Tom?
I think I'm in my mid-40s now. I'm what's classed as a retro gamer. Super Nintendo, Sega Mega Drive, and things like that. Back when I was 25, 30 years ago. I got into this as an educator, as a teacher, secondary teacher for nearly 20 years. For me, it's always been about finding that tool for engagement, that passion point, that vehicle to motivate and engage young people. And so be that through sport, I've coached sport. I'm a cricket coach. I've run golf clubs. I used to, before as a teacher, I worked in outdoor education, sending school groups off to Africa and the Himalaya and the Amazon and accompanying on those types of expeditions, all about developing skills, finding that vehicle to develop the wider personal traits, the holistic life skills that we know young people need so much, and finding that passion point. The thing really that motivates one young person is not necessarily the thing that motivates another one. So I read about British Esports. I read about the growth of esports sort of 2015, 2016, starting to grow. And I saw that the British Esports Federation had just been established. So I sent a speculative email that said, look, I've got a few ideas with schools and colleges. Is it something you're interested in looking at? And had a conversation with our founder and president. And at the end of that phone call, he said, right, how many days a week can you work? And so it was a really put your money where your mouth is type of moment. And that was 2016 going into 2017. And that led us on the journey to where we are in the work that we're doing with education schools. So it was very much about finding that thing, understanding that esports could be this thing in the same way that sport is, or music is, or drama is in schools, and that video gaming esports can be that thing that we can use, that vehicle that we can use. And so, yeah, that started the journey to where we are now.
Crikey, and it's huge, isn't it? Absolutely massive.
Yeah.
Jaime, you've been a real pioneer in integrating AR and VR into education. For those who might be new to these technologies, could you explain what AR and VR are and how they differ, and what makes them particularly powerful in an educational context?
Yeah, absolutely. So, augmented reality is really looking at how these digital overlays interact in our real world. So, we are seeing our physical spaces and what's around us, but we're enhancing that experience, if you will, by layering something in there. Something could be as simple as floating in front of you to something that is completely interacting and engaging in your space, like a bouncy ball hitting a wall and bouncing off and ricocheting. So, giving an illusion that something exists in your space, whereas virtual reality is really taking you out of where you're at and ultimately bringing you to somewhere new, completely digital experience around you, whether that look very cartoonish, whether that look very realistic, whatever that might be. That person now is given that illusion that they are no longer where they were at in their real world, but now kind of brought into this new place. So where it fits in education, I think, is really important, because I think a lot of people look at it as kind of an add-on or a funsie, as opposed to really looking at it as an opportunity that it is to engage our students, but giving them the deeper connection to that learning, meaningful, relatable content that the students can really be empowered to not just experience, but create. And I think that in a lot of ways, we're seeing that technology really encountering everywhere, especially as we're seeing the advancements of some of the 3D scanning that we're seeing, and things that are now the possibilities, even in the way we drive, giving us an enhanced experience for safety, or an enhanced experience for entertainment, or an enhanced experience for education, where we're actually engaging with maybe a chatbot using AI, but it's all in either a digital atmosphere in VR or happening right there live in augmented reality. So some of the possibilities that I think in education that we haven't even really tapped into, because we're still seeing this technology rapidly growing and changing, but certainly a place where our students, this is their technology, this is going to be the future of what they're going to be living in. And I think that really our opportunity as educators is to bring them and help them be a part of this with us.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's really permissive as well. Pervasive. Even just yesterday, I was at the local sort of DIY store, and I'd forgotten to tape measure, so I used the Measure app, that little AR app on my phone. You talked about sort of like scanning technologies like lidar inside your phone. That ability to just, is this actually big enough for the purpose I want to use it for? Just quickly measuring something. Yeah, there are loads of really practical, hands-on applications, aren't there, with these technologies? So yeah, lots of modeling and other things, and good for practice as well, particularly in VR as well, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting about the scanning aspect, because I don't think people have connected those dots yet. They're just saying, well, maybe if you work in this field, or there's a reason for you to scan. But ultimately, that scanning is evaluating the spaces of which we're in. So in virtual reality, I can actually bring in pieces of my real physical space in that digital world live. Like I can do that today. I can actually LiDAR scan things. It will appear in our virtual reality meeting spaces, having conversations, and they're literally seeing my desk. And then in augmented reality in that same platform, I can actually see them floating around in my physical space as we're having conversations. So we're literally content creation while collaborating across the world, happening live, scanning. I just think that there are, again, I just don't think we've even tapped into the possibilities. And I think it's a really cool journey that students are going to be able to go through as we encounter it. I think we have some serious challenges to get there, but I think in light of all of those challenges, I think students, they light up with this kind of technology. You really see an enthusiasm and an interest for them to want to use this kind of stuff with their learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see the same sort of thing, Tom, as well with gaming, don't we? Esports, is still continuing to gain massive traction in education. Every new school I visit, there's a new sort of esports team being formed, often linking in with your champs events and things as well. So really, really great to see this. It's clearly more than just entertainment. What are the key? What are some of the key educational benefits of esports? I listened to a great sort of conversation on Radio 4 here in the UK recently, linked to the esports event in Saudi Arabia. And they were saying, well, it's just people just playing Call of Duty, isn't it? There's a bit more to it than that, isn't there? So how do you see it fitting into the broader landscape of digital learning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think let's be clear at the start. There are the professional esports players, and there are the professional esports teams that are earning huge salaries playing global tournaments. And a tiny fraction of the young people will go that in our schools will go on to be part of that in the same way as that happens in sport. Only a tiny fraction of the young people who play sport in our traditional sport in our schools go on to be professional athletes. Same thing happens in esports. So that there is that. And then there's the piece, and we might touch on this later in terms of the wider video game industry. So esports is classified as organized competitive video gaming, and it's always human versus human. So it's part of the video game industry, obviously, because they're playing video games to do it. The video game industry is worth on an annual basis about $240 billion on a global basis each year, of which the esports industry is about $2 billion. Okay. So the video game industry is worth more on an annual basis than the film industry and the music industry combined. I'll just let that one settle in, because sometimes it takes a little bit to get your head around it, thinking, yeah, so the video game industry is worth more than the film industry and the music industry combined. So actually, when parents are saying, well, what are you doing wasting your time playing video games? Where's that going to get you? Actually, the jobs in the wider video game industry and the digital industries are huge. The opportunities are massive. But to come back to about the educational benefits, so it's really about esports being this vehicle. In the same way as we've used traditional sport or music or drama, team-based activities to develop these holistic skills that we know young people need moving forward. We know we need in society: the teamwork, the leadership, the communication, the decision-making, the problem solving. As playing as part of a team, that's significant. Esports is another way of doing that. And so if you're not into traditional sport, if you're not part of the school orchestra, if you're not part of the school play, where are you getting this team-based activity from? What if you're into all things tech and all things digital? Where are you getting your chance to follow your passion? So competitive esports in schools, running teams in schools, is one way of engaging a wider demographic of young people, essentially. And then we're able to celebrate their success in the same way as we do with the football team or with the orchestra or whatever it might be. In an assembly, the football team's beating our local rivals. Let's give them a clap. Okay, what about the kids who don't play in that, who aren't part of that, but are into video games and all things digital? So esports allows that. The academic side of things, then, with the different range of academic qualifications that are linked to esports now, the BTEC that we've spoken about, there are now level 4 and level 5 HNC and HNDs in esports. There's also level 1, level 2 leadership, esports leadership awards as well. And as part of that, they're learning business skills. They're learning about marketing. They're learning about social media. They're learning about video production. They're learning about streaming, about social media, about creative media. They're learning about health and wellness, nutrition, event management, just using the vehicle of esports, essentially. So once we can get people past the point of seeing it as being video games, but looking at the skills young people are developing, looking at the links to digital, creative industries, STEM industries, the opportunities are absolutely massive.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. One of the things I love seeing, I don't run any esports teams myself, but just seeing my own children play, one of my favourite things actually is seeing the frustration when they don't achieve something, because what they then do, because they're playing on different devices with their friends as well. In this, we see from like the World Economic Forum, future skills about critical thinking, creativity, all these different things, and I see the way that they collaborate to overcome the obstacles to achieve the solution to the problem. And esports is just a great, like I say, a really good vehicle for promoting that. Sure, there's a few shouts and what have you at the frustration of not being able to achieve it, but it's what it forces them to then do afterwards that really helps the learning and move those things forwards. Do you see that a lot yourself with the teams that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a resilience piece, isn't it? It's the winning and the losing, exactly as happens in traditional sport. And sometimes, obviously, the lessons we learn when things don't go as well as we hope they would are equally as important, or even more important, than when things actually go as we hope they would. And as I said, for some young people who don't get that through the traditional routes, or what have been the traditional norms, if you like, in schools and in education. The fact that esports is giving them that opportunity to do that, to find people like them who are into the same sort of things as them, to create that social network. And thinking about the young people in our schools who don't necessarily feel comfortable standing up in front of a group of people speaking, or are not necessarily going to be the ones to put themselves forward in a team, in a normal team environment, but actually stick a set of headsets on them, give them a controller in their hand, stick them in front of a video cam like this, and maybe they are. But in real life, in person, that's maybe not something they're comfortable with doing straight away. So it's just a different way of harnessing people, and different way of harnessing talent, essentially.
Yeah, no, I completely concur, and love to hear those sort of examples there as well. Thanks, Tom. Jim, I wanted to come back to you about working with educators about how we actually implement AR and VR in classrooms. I was wondering, could you share some examples of how sort of technologies such as AR and VR have transformed learning experiences, and what sort of impacts you've seen on student engagement and their obviously then the knock-on effect with the outcomes they have?
Yeah, I really definitely see more of a transition even with teachers, more than I even see with students. I think students are ready and eager to try new things. They're there already. There's not as much hesitancy to jump into something new. I think a lot of it is a shift in the way teachers think too. So it's not just the technology itself, it's really almost embracing the concept that you don't need to know everything in order to try new things in the classroom. I really think that the way that AR and VR has been used has been kind of surface level in most cases. Unfortunately, I think that the reason being is that they are dabbling with one thing. It's been successful. They'll stick to that one thing. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing for everyone. I just think that not everybody has embraced possibilities of what more can be done. And that's okay too. I think that there's just kind of an evolution of how quickly we move in education, right? It's, as we were hearing before in esports, how long it's taken to get to the place that we're at today. And I would say ARVR is in the same place. And that technology, with the change happening so rapidly, is hard for people to keep up. It's hard to be kind of at the cutting edge of what that technology is. Nor do I think it's absolutely necessary to be at the cutting edge. But I do think that the way that we leverage the technology is important. And that is identifying where your students struggle. And just like we were talking before with esports, how there is for some kids, a disconnect in how we present content or how we present opportunities to them, right? I think ARVR is the same thing here, because we can say how we are presenting this to our students in the way that they learn is not engaging for them to connect to. Maybe they don't need to communicate with somebody else and have this conversation to make a connection. Maybe it's not about writing it down and memorizing something. Maybe it's not about watching a video about this, but maybe it is going into virtual reality, dissecting something, engaging and physically seeing things adjust and move around that is finally making that connection. I can't tell you how many times I was a math teacher, and that's probably the only thing I ever really could have taught, minus maybe technology to some extent. But all the other subjects as a student, I was not a great student. I kind of got by. I did the very basic, but I think I didn't have the kinds of opportunities that we have today to learn things. A lot of it was dependent on memorization. And I think that's where teachers want to replicate this technology to do just that. And I think that we're missing the mark. I think that I've seen people really dig in and give students, for instance, understanding the periodic table, using a platform like CoSpaces and saying every student owns a different element and they're going to demonstrate that element. But collectively, we're going to go into augmented reality and virtual reality. We're going to go through each of the periodic table and we're going to be essentially in this 360 experience of what this possibly could look like and how to make those connections. So collectively as a class, they're all learning from one another and they're approaching something that can be very complex and kind of disconnected from their real world. And they're building it. And I think that those kinds of things that really are the possibilities in a classroom, it needs to be inspired for teachers. They need to see it. But I honestly think if we let our students unleash what the possibilities are, if we let our students start to create that demand, I think we will be night and day difference from where we're at today.
Yeah, no, I concur with you there. And certainly I think perhaps the pandemic has helped with people's sort of not ease of adoption, but openness to trying new things, right? But what I find sometimes is that there are, I mean, maybe there are, and you can share with us, Jane, but we know of frameworks like SAMR and TPAC and PICRAT and all these different things, these sort of adoption models for technology. But often we've seen sort of teachers sort of even stuck at that sort of substitution level, augmentation, perhaps. Are there similar sort of approaches you can apply with AR and VR?
I definitely think so. I usually talk about it from just experiences to creation. I think we all start at that experience level when we're seeing something and what is this technology capable of doing. But I do think if we're not moving to our students being those content creators, we're really doing them a disservice. It doesn't mean we do everything creation, because I don't think that's realistic either. That's like saying in a classroom, everything's maker. Well, when do you learn? When are you hearing new concepts? You obviously are going to have some lecture built into that process, if you will. But I definitely think that there has to be a balance of those things instead of just all or one. But you mentioned COVID, and I think this is an interesting point that we're facing right now. I don't know if esports is facing this, but I know on the ARVR side, and certainly I can see gaming in general facing this, is that because so many students had to go and be on these one-to-one devices, having access to the learning, a lot of districts have chosen to go with devices that are very low in cost and easy to manage. And because of that, it has really limited the possibilities that we have. A lot of the things I was sharing were things on tablets, for instance, because that's very easily accessible in a classroom. But when all of the kind of management of that, it was very hard for them to manage, and I think very costly, and you had to have the right specialists to be able to do those things. So in light of some of the things like COVID, I think it's actually hindered the technology from expanding where it could be, because the requirement and the quick requirement that it required for our classrooms to have access in general.
I agree with you there. The use of Chromebooks, for example, hampers what we're talking about here. And the barrier to entry essentially into esports is the availability of kit, in particular graphics cards, and having graphics cards in machines to enable the games to be played. I agree. It's something that moving forward is a big issue with all the tech, isn't it? How are we supposed to be enabling our young people to develop the skills with linked to the software, linked to the hardware, if schools don't have the systems and the machines that can run them?
That's a really interesting point there as well. Thank you, Tom. And I'm going to skip forward a few questions. I might come back to some of them we've got previously, but it leads quite nicely on something we're going to talk about, which is about how we can actually get into doing all these things, because whether you're US or UK, budget constraints are real. And so we can understand why districts or local authorities or academy chains, whatever your setting is, might choose to go down a device which enables certain learning activities to happen that are easier to manage and so forth and so on. But if you're looking to, innovate and use, engage with esports or using ARVR or even combining the two, have either of you got any advice for schools, districts, trusts, how they can overcome these barriers and successfully integrate when they don't necessarily have the right kit at the moment? So you got any thoughts, Tom?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things we always try and do is when we're talking about schools and colleges working within this space, it's not to say, right, you need to go to the finance team and say, right, we need £30,000 for a new room of gaming computers. It's when you are upgrading another suite of PCs, instead of spending £750 on a desktop, if you move into the £850 or £900 for a desktop, you're starting to then have the kit that enables you to engage with a better level of digital creative software, essentially. And for example, the teaching and learning benefits of being able to have graphics cards that allow you to engage with video editing software and production broadcasting software, the opportunities that then brings. An example in my school, the last school I taught in, we developed a media suite. And up until that point, the school had an Adobe license that it couldn't actually really use properly because the machines weren't good enough to run this Adobe suite. And all of a sudden, they now had machines that were good enough and they could do it. And the rugby first 15 came into that media suite on a Monday lunchtime to analyze their games from the previous weekend using the video editing software that now these machines could run. And then, by the way, we then ran Minecraft clubs at lunchtimes. We ran the esports teams after school. And so it's not just all about playing video games. It is about the wider teaching and learning opportunities and, future thinking. How do we develop future ready skills and future ready citizens if we don't have the equipment that they can do that on? And so it does take a bit of a leap of, not a leap of faith, but really investing in the long term rather than the short termism. But even it can start off with 3 PCs. That's all. To have a Rocket League team, you just need 3 machines that are good enough to play the game as a starting point. So spending an extra £600 across 3 machines to have graphics cards will enable a school to engage with esports.
That's really interesting and helpful.
I want to add to that.
Go on, Jamie. I'm coming to you now. Yeah, go on, Jamie.
I'm like chomping at the bits here. I think it's really interesting that we brought up actual physical sports, right? That we would see at a school. And there's no way we would start a football league without having a football location for them to practice, or having a football, right? Oh, we're going to play with some random ball because, I want you to get the concept down, but I'm not going to provide a football. I think those types of questions need to be had when it comes to these other technologies too. There is not going to be a good experience for them, and there's not going to be the skills that they need to have in order to be successful in these areas. I think it's an afterthought. So people are budgeting for other things first, and then later considering these other things. And then you're like, well, what fits? And I always encourage people to do that. I tell them, find out what you have right now, leverage the things that you really haven't leveraged before. You have not, leveraged the capabilities of those devices. That's a great starting point. But like mentioned before, with just a few devices, I typically recommend getting a cart, having a place in your library, having a computer lab that you have those technologies available, that they can practice those things and they can practice them well and they can acquire the skills that are necessary. But 100%, I don't even think we're just talking about devices. I think we're talking about network capabilities, restrictions across schools that you're limited by. I think it's, again, completely a different mindset. If you're going to embrace it, don't restrict it to a point where it's not fun, where it's impossible to accomplish. So I think it's really all departments coming together, coming up with a plan, and really pushing forward together collectively.
That's it. I mean, if you set a direction of travel, you know where you're heading, don't you? Right. So if you take, we're going to do football, or we're going to do Rocket League, or whatever it is, and what I tend to see is once you've got that sort of direction, that journey sort of laid out, actually what you tend to find along the way, like you were alluding to, Tom, you find alternative uses, don't you? Right. So you could use it for some video editing, like the rugby team team did, for example. You can use it for so many things. You end up getting better value for money as a result of it. I was wondering, Tom, British Esports Student Champs has been pretty successful, I would say, given some of the numbers I was sort of seeing. Are there any sort of? I'd like you to tell us more about that and how schools can get involved. But are there any lessons that have been learned that might be useful, linking into this conversation about how we can, set that direction of travel so that schools can put budget aside to enable these sort of things to take place?
Yeah, I think we have, and thank you. It has been successful. We started out that first pilot I did in 2017. We had 8 secondary schools, 8 further education colleges, 4 secondary schools, and 4 pupil referral units. And this last academic year, we had over 700 school and college teams playing each week. So across the 2 seasons, we had probably 6,500 young people play across the academic year, which is a fantastic journey in 6 years. Look, I think it was tough to start off with. It's that first initial bit of actually, you have, as with all technologies, you have your early adopters, don't you? And the people who are all in from the start. And then it takes a little bit more time to convince people of the reasons behind it and the benefits of doing it. But I think it's when the sort of senior leaders saw the engagement of the young people with this, in engaging in a different way, and different young people engaging to how they normally see it. As an example, in my school, they were part of the early Overwatch leagues. That's when Overwatch was 6 versus 6. And 4 of the students in that team of 6 didn't represent the school in any other way. Not in music, not in drama, not in sport. They didn't represent the school in any other way. And for some of those students, they were the stereotypical digital computer kids that are hanging around in the computer rooms at lunchtime. But then some of the kids playing, the 2 lads who played in that team who were in sports teams, one of them, he was a sub 24.5 second 200 meter runner. He was a sub 11.5 second 100 meter runner. He was a county tennis player. He also loved Overwatch and played in the Overwatch team. So what it does is bring all these different school student groups together, all these different demographics together through their love and their passion of games. And then it's not just about the players with esports. It is about the team that goes around that, the leadership, the student leadership that goes around that, especially if they're broadcasting, if they're streaming their games through Twitch. In the same way as, there's the school newspaper when I was at school that, I was part of the school magazine. In esports, you get the stream team around it if they're broadcasting. So you have the on-screen talent, you also have the video editors, the kids designing the jerseys, designing the logos. Not just about those who are playing, because there are some students who are not interested in Rocket League. They don't like Rocket League, but they love streaming and they want to be part of this stream team around it. So when schools start seeing that, which doesn't happen in traditional sport like it does in esports, you see this whole ecosystem that's developing around it. And that's when the schools are starting to say, well, there is real value in this. It is helping our creative digital media students, even if they're not studying esports specifically, but if they're doing media courses, if they're doing some sort of creative media, if they're doing some video production or arts, there's huge opportunities to use it transferable. It's the transferable skills across the curriculum as well.
Yeah, there's loads there. I saw similar things with my student digital leaders back in the day, and student digital leaders were students who would help with bringing on technology within the school or college. They trained staff or parents and these sort of things. But for some students, that wasn't what they liked. But they loved making a screencast, or they loved sort of populating things further, for the website, or they would manage the social media, or they'd manage the YouTube channel. Do you know what I mean? So there's a real breadth of skills that you can have around the whole thing, isn't there? I wanted, thank you for that, Tom.
No worries.
And so I need to know as well, where can people find out and get involved in the esports student champs? We need to get that from you before we move
absolutely.
on.
Well, thank you for letting me put that plug in. So BritishEsports.org is the website, and then if you click on student champs, the entries open in a week or 10. Well, they're open now, but they close in a couple of weeks. So if you want to enter a team for that, please do so.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much, Tom. I wanted to start talking about digital literacy. We talked about it a bit already, actually, because there's a lot of things we're talking about with video editing and all those other elements that you brought up, Tom, and yourself, Jamie. It is increasingly important, particularly in an AI world. So with this push towards digital literacy, there's still plenty of work to be done. Coming to you first, Jamie, in your opinion, do current evaluation standards and policies really support integration of things like esports and AR and VR into the curricula? And if not, and I think you've kind of said already, they don't really, right? So if they don't, what changes would you advocate for, and how can we make those changes happen, Jamie?
I think that there is a push for technology in general and having skills, general technology skills, if you will. I don't know if there's specifics per se about using these immersive experiences, for instance. I think that it leaves it pretty open ended when it comes to policies or, standards, expectations. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. I don't know if I would say it has to be so specific, because I think at the end of the day, your students, and it doesn't mean ARVR is always the best avenue for every skill. I think that there are going to be things that you have to balance. You have to bring in diversity of different options for our students. So I don't know if I would necessarily push for a change in that per se. I think it's more so a push for us to find what's best for our individual students. And that takes time, and that is not budgeted. That our teachers are scrambling to be able to just accomplish the tasks that they already have. And I think the more that we push for that and the less that we give resources for our teachers, it's probably likely going to be less that we ever see real innovation happening, because it's impossible. It's impossible to keep up with already the crazy demand on teachers, but to throw in one more thing, right? So unless they see it as something that does change that learning landscape for our students, then it is really hard to ask them to make that change. And that really does come from our administration, right? It comes from a support. It comes from recognizing maybe that you bring in different professional development opportunities than your traditional, here's how you get in your grade book. And that's all they learn, right? But instead, I think diversifying those opportunities for our teachers to learn, giving them kind of whetting their appetite on things that we know that they should be learning along the way, and seeing those possibilities and realities taking place across the country and across the world. I also want to point on the digital literacy thing, that I am not a jump in headfirst kind of person. I tend to look at these technologies and recognize just as much potential with good as there is bad. And sometimes when you are embracing these kinds of technologies, everybody thinks that I'm like, everybody needs to have a headset on their head. And I don't think I feel that way. I think that there are ways to use something like that effectively, safely, and balanced. But I don't think that embracing everything all the time is a balance. I think that there are some things that we have to consider. The age of our kids, for instance, when we're talking about putting them into headsets, and we're starting to Google and Apple are starting to look at, low grading, what age we're going to allow students to be in those headsets without proper research to know how it's affecting their brains, how much time they're spending on these types of things. I think when it comes to digital literacy, as much as I say that these things are possible, I'm also encouraging people to really look at a balanced approach on how much they're bringing to those students and helping them understand how to balance their lifestyle as well. And if that digital literacy is not part of what they're learning with any technology, I think we're in danger of kind of failing them in that way as well. And that is, true addictions and struggles and anxiety and an increase of, fears or whatever it might be, right? So like all of these things that are sometimes too much of any good thing could be really bad for them. And I think that the balance of understanding those things is just as much what we should be teaching them when we are teaching them those cool things too.
Yeah, absolutely. Cognizance of what works and is really important. The message I've shared for a long time. Just because you can do something with technology doesn't necessarily mean that you should, right?
Yep.
And so I think between the three of us, we'll probably. Do you find like most rooms you walk into, you're probably the sort of most technologically minded or most geeky person in that room? But for me, it's got to be balanced against it actually having an impact, because get esports, ARVR, it's got opportunity to be sort of gimmicky or linked to things beyond learning. what I'm loving in the conversations with you both, and thank you both again so much for joining me, is this idea that we want to really drive standards. It has to be for the right reasons, and which is so important. And actually, I suspect you'll find you get better return on your investment for these sort of things as well, which again goes to that sort of setting that journey thing that you were both talking about before. I want to jump to you, Tom, on the same question really, but just sort of pivoting it a little bit. Are there any sort of developments you're seeing across the UK? We've got a new Labour government here in the UK. You've got a big expansion of the Student Champs initiative. Are there any sort of changes on the way? And are there ways that the digital literacy can be supported through esports?
Well, I hope so. I really do, because there maybe hasn't been that recognition of esports at a government level really before. In the same way as before our time, because obviously we're not that old, either three of us, but PE wasn't a subject 35, 40 years ago in schools. Sport wasn't recognized as an actual subject, in the same way that 15 years ago, media wasn't a subject in our schools. And when media, I remember it was early in my teaching career when the first media qualifications were being delivered. And it was like, what's this Mickey Mouse, subject? What do we need media for? Who's going to teach this? The same things are happening. The same arguments are being made about esports and have been made about esports over the last few years in terms of the validity of it. What I would point to is the things that we've discussed about the size of the industry and the roles and the opportunities and the wider transferable skills that come out of it, not just in the video game industry, but the wider digital tech industries. Where I see with the new Labour government, as you're mentioning, this whole idea around digital skills, isn't it? And digital skills qualifications for 16-year-olds. There was a House of Lords report that Lord Johnson chaired, putting forward the recommendation for this digital skills qualification for 14 to 16-year-olds. Esports is the absolute perfect vehicle to deliver that. And video games is the perfect way of delivering that. This modern, relevant, incredibly popular vehicle through which we can deliver all these types of skills. So I just hope that people are willing, those decision makers are willing to open their eyes to the opportunities and the possibilities that esports provides, essentially.
Absolutely. And I mean, you were talking before me, and you helped to contribute towards the creation of the BTEC with Pearson, weren't you? Right. And so you're saying you've got level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5 qualifications. If they're there, it seems to me like esports could be a real lever to actually enabling these digital skills and digital literacy to come about for young people.
Yeah, I hope so. And certainly this is what the conversations, we work closely with Dell and Alienware and Intel, and this is the reasons that they want to work in esports, and it is to help this digital divide, help promote these skills, these digital skills that they're seeing that they need in the workforce around they see the digital skills gaps and how esports can help in all the ways that I've already suggested. So it very much is a big opportunity for those who are willing to, people in ed tech and people like yourself, Mark, are looking at this and starting to recognize it. It's how we get this message out now, essentially, how we get the mainstream, if you like, to really appreciate and understand the opportunities, not just with esports, but with obviously the AR and the VR and all these technologies as well. But cognizant of your point, not just for the sake of it, that actually here are the reasons why we should be doing it and the opportunities and the benefits it really gives.
Yeah, absolutely. But one of the blockers, though, as we've alluded to a few times, has been around cost, right? Yeah. So, and certainly through my work with schools over the last sort of 10 years or so, often a barrier is confidence with technology as well. And we've touched on the pandemic and things already. But Jaime, I wondered, for those teachers who are just starting to explore AR and VR, and maybe if I could come back to you in a moment with a similar question around esports, Tom, for people who are just starting to explore, what are some simple, cost-effective ways? Often, you've already got some of these things in your pockets, right? So, what are some of the simple and cost-effective ways that you can introduce some of these technologies into the classroom, and how can educators sort of build on these initial steps to create more immersive activities over time?
Yeah, I think that there are some really great tools out there that are very easy to implement. To me, that's really where you want to start, because oftentimes when we're talking about budget, they're not considering all the other costs associated with something. For instance, they want to buy a headset. They go to buy the headset and then they realize how costly it is to manage those headsets. And then also budgeting for keeping things safe. So keeping it sanitary, having a space wide enough. How are we creating boundaries, right? So oftentimes when budgets are being aligned and they're like, I got a grant, let me go buy all these headsets. It's like, hold on, you got to realize that there's a lot of other costs associated with those things. So my recommendation is to start with what you already have in your classroom. And there are some things. So if all you have is Chromebooks, let's start with a tool like CoSpace has mentioned before, because that is web capable. Or McGraw-Hill just released their AR app, and all of their stuff is now accessible on Chromebooks through the browser. So browser-based experiences, I think, are a great way to start in leveraging the tools that you already have. Again, whetting their appetite, getting them excited, and then building a case for why you need to go out and purchase these other things, because you see the momentum increasing, or you see that you have to have this other device in order to accomplish the things that you want your students to grow in or learn or create. So all of those aspects, I think, are part of those decisions with budget. But really, that easy implementation is probably our biggest piece that is the hardest for schools to adopt, because if they have to learn a whole new system in this process, the likelihood that it will be sustained is not really there. Because if you train this one rock star teacher to go in and bring all this great technology, and you pay $5,000 for this device, yeah, hey, this $5,000 device, we got you all this training for the year. You bought all these other packages. I'm talking about a product, but I'm not going to say a product. But you go out and get all these things, right? And then you've trained this teacher, and that teacher's like, all right, I'm out. I'm going to another school next year. And then what happens to those devices? They go in your closet, or they're sitting there not being leveraged or used. So the training aspect is difficult if you're asking them to learn a bunch of new things. But if they could take their knowledge from what they're already using and build upon it, I think that there's much likelihood of them continuing to use it in the future.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
I agree there. Sorry, just a
Tom.
quick point. Sorry, completely. Really, I think for me about the teaching as well of esports. As we move forward, there will be more people coming into teaching who are gamers and who are esports, understand esports. At the moment, that is as well as all the stuff that Jamie's just explained so well. It is around teachers being willing to feel uncomfortable about the fact that there are students who know more about it than they do. And we as teachers are so used to being, or most of us, a lot of us are being used to being the experts. And students, you sit there and will impart our information and our knowledge on you. Whereas that's not what esports is about, because young people are actually engage in it a lot more than the teachers do at this point in time. So teachers have to be comfortable about being the facilitator, essentially, not necessarily the expert, but the facilitator. And the ins and outs of some of these games, the kids are going to know far more than we are as teachers. However, do they know how to set up a team properly? Do they know how can they deal with the winning and the losing and the reflection, all that sort of stuff? We as facilitators in our role as teachers have to do that. And again, that is just something that people need to learn about developing the esports, introducing the esports.
And the things we can do things as well as educators, right? So it could be that you want to be a commentator. Well, that's that's oracy. That's work you do in subjects beyond esports, right? If you're planning an event, there's numeracy in there. There's loads of skills where sure there'll be times when there'll be things we were talking before, weren't we, about not playing Fortnite because our children are better than us, right? Yeah. Okay, but there are lots of things that we can do as education professionals to reinforce the activities that are going to be going alongside it. So, it is about our partnership, isn't it? You were talking, Jamie, too. Sorry, Tom. You were saying before, Jamie, too, about that use what you've got and build up from that. Action research is often a good way to do that. Don't buy 10 headsets, buy one and try it and see what the case is. There may well be. You said you need sort of 3 for a rocket team, Tom. All I can think of with the Rocket team is Team Rocket from Pokemon. I'm just saying with that one. But that's 3 devices. That could be a good starting point to see if there's a case for change to then amping it up and going bigger. Have you got any examples of where schools have sort of taken this sort of slower and building it up approach and had some impact with it?
Yeah, certainly. The 3. The reason I use that example is because it was a school an ex-colleague of mine used to teach in, and she had a letter from, and this shows the individual impact for students. This one year 9 lad had just started the school, and he wrote her a letter and said, "Look, I've just seen the advert for the British Esports Student Champs. This is back in the early days. I'm new at this school. I don't really like playing sport, but I love Rocket League and I'd love to enter a team. But I'm just a new boy at the school and you're probably not going to listen to me. But is there anything that you can do to help?" And she ended up finding 3 battered old staff laptops that weren't being used. And these 3 year 9 lads played from the back of the IT office on a Wednesday after school and got through to the live national finals that year, which we held at the NEC in Birmingham, and got through to the grand final. They got beaten by a 6th form team, but who were playing in a proper gaming sort of suite. But they started off with 3 battered old laptops. Now, did they go on and get a media suite at that school? I don't know, if I'm perfectly honest, but it shows what can be done as a starting point, and that you don't need the tens of thousands of pounds spent on the kit to start off with.
No, absolutely. Did you have any sort of similar stories, Jamie, or any other technologies that are sort of low entry in terms of cost to try and work with? You mentioned, was it McGraw? Was one of the tools before? I haven't come.
Yeah, McGraw.
I haven't.
Yeah, McGraw Hill's
What is that? I haven't come across that
they're a
before. Publisher.
Yeah, they are a publisher. So they sell their content, of course, to schools, but they have a partnership with Verizon. And Verizon has created a platform, the Verizon Innovative Learning portal, headquarters is what they call it. And that has all free resources, literally has free professional development. It has all the apps that are being released, which are all new, things that nobody really knows about, that they've partnered with companies to be able to release, and 100% free for students to use and classrooms to use. It's not collecting their data, so it's very, very careful about how it's being presented back to schools. And the schools are able to completely leverage it for free. They paid me to create courses on augmented and virtual reality, and they gave it away for free,
Wow.
which has never happened. I've never seen anything like that. McGraw-Hill is one of those partners with Verizon. They created the augmented reality application in order to visualize. They started off with math, and now they have science and social studies, and they're getting ready to release their language arts. So it is like the most what's the way I can explain their app? They do such a terrific job of engaging the learner, and they're bringing everything through an experience that they're making connections that you would have never done had you not done something like this. So, I mean, like I said, for my background for other subjects is not great, and I'm not, proud of that. But when I watch the social studies content, I'm like, I never knew that about the Boston Tea Party. I'm like all of a sudden like learning content for the first time myself. But I think that is a way that our students can engage and really have zero cost. And they have put it on the Chromebooks and made it available through the web, because they've recognized how many people are on Chromebooks. But is it the same experience as experiencing it in augmented reality? No, there's a purpose for it being presented in augmented reality, right? There's a reason for you. And if there's no reason, don't put it in augmented reality. Keep it on the browser, keep it on a computer. But if there's a purpose to actually see something like that experienced in your space, then that is the way you want to preferably experience it for your students. But long story short, there's a ton of really incredible things out there, completely free, with all the resources to get you started. And that's really your best approach. That's going to be sustainable. I just want to point out one other thing that is a little bit off track from what you were mentioning, Mark, but something that was mentioned earlier by Tom, but the labor gap. I think that is a big issue for augmented and virtual reality as well. There is a massive demand for skills in these areas. And I actually have a friend that worked at the University of Alaska, was a professor there, taught kids how to create virtual reality using Unity, kept getting requests to be able to build things for industries. And these industries, they wanted to present training in this way. And it's a huge demand right now, because the cost of having somebody actually there to provide the training, the things that they can't do in real life, like learning how to use bear spray with a real bear. You're never going to do that. But in his case, he built it in virtual reality because Alaska has a requirement for people working in that area. And there's a lot of bear attacks. So because of it, he created kind of these simulations, if you will, and gave people a chance to really experience what it could look like. And everybody that did it died. If that doesn't tell you that the way we've been teaching it would still lead to death, right? But if you can actually encounter something that helps you deal with that immediate fear of what you're experiencing, then it gives you the opportunity. It also, the funding for products that could be damaged from using certain, like a forklift and things of that sort, that you can eliminate through these different types of training. That is a big need right now. And he cannot find anybody that he's like, I don't care what degree, I don't care if they're degreed, I don't care if they're just in college and they have any interest at all in this. Please send them my way, because I cannot find enough people. I am turning away business, government business, left and right, because I don't have enough people to help me accomplish these things. So I think that just goes to show that we are needing to have our students equipped with these skills for what is the demand in the industries today.
No, I see that, and you were sharing that, and I was thinking about, there's an organisation here in the UK called the Education Endowment Foundation, and they released a report back 4 or so years ago now, about sort of the 4 sort of key domains, 4 key things that are going to have the biggest impact on learning. And one of one of them, so it's the 4 most impactful things that you can consider. And one of the top 4 was how technology is really, really good at helping young people with explanations and modelling. And ARVR is just so good for modelling, whether you're using an AR app like the free Rivers app, or whether you're doing a fully immersive model where you're practicing a flight simulator or dodging bears or whatever it is. It can be so useful. Look, I'm mindful both, and thank you so much for your time and all the things you've shared. I'm mindful that we're almost out of time. So if I could just jump into the wrap-up bit. I can't believe how quickly the time's flown. Could you share one key piece of advice for our audience on how they can begin or enhance their use of esports or AR or VR into their educational practices? And I'll jump straight back to you, Jaime, if I can, please.
Sure. I have a website that I share a lot of resources at. I know that a lot of people are writing about ARVR, so there's a lot of things out there. My blog has over 200 augmented and virtual reality resources specific for education. That will definitely get you started. So really focused in and narrow in on where your students are struggling, finding the right resource to help them bridge that gap. So I know ARVR, of course, there's tons of books out there. There's lots of really great content out there on social media. And I use the hashtag ARVRinEDU. Other people use it as well to be able to share. There's a great community out there. So I would definitely recommend, if you're looking and interested in moving forward, connect with people, join Facebook groups, join social chats and things of that sort, so that you can build that community as you're approaching it and having the support to leverage as you move forward.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Jaime. And Tom, any advice you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think as an educator, if you're unsure about the support that you'll get for esports in a school, use student voice, speak to the students, and actually ask the students how many of them are doing this anyway, in their own bedrooms, in the playrooms at home, whatever it is. How many of them are playing video games, what they're doing anyway. And then you take that evidence to the senior leaders to say, look at what they're doing anyway. How can we engage with this? How can we work with what they're doing already to do this? And that's always an eye opener, because we know in the UK, I think it's 9 out of 10 is young people are video gaming on average. for 12 to 14 hours a week, some stats like that from Ofcom as part of their annual reports on children's media usage. So the numbers are huge. So as educators, how can you engage with this? How can you use this positively is a starting point. And then you can take that evidence, take that information to the senior leaders, to the decision makers to actually get this going in schools.
Well, listen, brilliant, great advice from both of you there. Thanks to you both for joining us. We'll put the notes for some of the resources that were shared by Tom and Jaime into the show notes for the webinar. You can watch it back if you've missed it. But for now, here's how solutions such as NetSupport School can be used in its environment. And here we have a lovely case study. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next webinar.
So my name's Simon Harrison, and I'm the Digital Learning Director for the Faculty of Engineering. We're quite an old traditional university, but we've been teaching, I've been teaching design here for now 20 years. And I suppose we're just trying to keep our curriculum modern and up to date and putting the latest technology in to make sure our students are ready for the new world they're going to be working in. So we noticed, keeping in touch with kind of our alumni, our recent graduates, that more and more companies in the design field were using VR as part of their everyday design process. The headsets are coming down in price, it's quite affordable, and they're making use of that. And so we knew we needed to teach this. And we've been doing it for about 2 years now, but with a small number of headsets, and still putting students basically through small groups teaching, and not giving them a great deal of time to spend in those headsets because we've got to get all the students through. But more than anything, it became, well, it was the hardest thing I've ever had to teach in my 20 years. When you've got a student wearing a VR headset and you don't know what they're looking at, and they're asking you for help and asking you why they can't do something, but you can't see why they can't do it, it's very, very difficult. So we put in a new facility here to try and combat certainly that problem, along with other things as well. So we have 40 PCs plus the teaching PC. In fact, we have several teaching PCs. We use several because we have one on a mobile device and one fixed. And 40 high-power PCs that the students are effectively, their headsets are tethered to by cable. We use NetSupport really to control those Windows PCs. One, to enable us to run the classroom, to be able to launch applications, close applications, and just help some of the students when they do something wrong. So sometimes it's the operating system that's, I mean not the Windows operating system, but the virtual reality operating system, which is I think called Steam VR. That might not connect properly, it might not work properly, and we need to manually restart it. And if you can probably see in the video, I don't know if you can see, all the PCs are in the ceiling, so we need to be able to access them remotely. They're what's called a headless PC. There are no keyboards or mice or monitors for each PC, so we need to be able to access them, control them independently of the students, as well as letting the students control them. Well, as I was saying earlier, you can't see what the students are seeing traditionally. So it becomes incredibly difficult to teach. And the only way you could have done that with previous technology was to pair each headset with its own TV or screen and watch what was happening on the TV or the screen. When you've got 40 PCs in a room and you don't want to have a room bigger than necessary for that activity, then you've got to avoid having those monitors or those TVs. So NetSupport gave us that solution where we could strip out all that kind of control gear, the monitors, the keyboards and so on, and keep the infrastructure simple, but still allow us to view any desktop and view any PC and view any headset that the students might be using. I expected to have difficulties within about 5 minutes of reading the instructions and pressing go. It was done. It was one of the easiest. It was the easiest thing to set up in this entire room, to be perfectly honest. Everything else gave me far more trouble than NetSupport School. Yeah, so Initially, we were really just thinking about being able to watch what the students were doing. That's really where we came from. But once we had the software, we realised we could launch applications, kill applications, send them files that they might want to operate, and I think then we started to look at where we could be using this software maybe in future in other areas, online examinations or other classroom controls, etc. So we're using quite a lot of functionality now in this room, but I think we're starting to see how this software could be used in so many other ways within the university. Just being able to see, it was virtually impossible to teach VR before in the way we had done it. I had to really try and resist the temptation, but I would always end up saying, can you pass me the headset? And I have to take it off the student and look through my own eyes what was actually happening. And then I say, oh, you're in the wrong application, or you've got this wrong. And I don't really like to take the headset off somebody. You want to let them be in control of the apparatus. So I always felt uncomfortable doing that. I can now walk alongside them with a mobile, a Windows tablet PC, see what they're seeing on the tablet and just have a conversation with them and resolve their problems really easily. So it's that communication with students has been wonderful. Huge cost benefits, in terms of cost to the benefit it provides, amazing, really simple to set up, very intuitive interface. It does what it says on the tin. And actually, I suppose the other thing I'd like to say is we have had similar types of this software in the past at university, which I've tried in other rooms, and they've always been really glitchy, and I've had problems connecting, and it's been a poor kind of connection. I've not had that at all with NetSupport. It's been really smooth all the way. When I click a student desktop, it opens, and I can see what they're doing straight away. So it's been really reliable. Absolutely, yeah. It had been recommended to me. My wife's a teacher and she'd used it for many years, and she said it was as good as they can get in the market, really. And I've had no issues with it at all. And what I would also like to say is the online support I've had afterwards, both either chat support or actually in person on a phone call, has always been super quick and really friendly and helpful. Well, certainly try it, but I think it works really well, and I've had no problems with it. And I think once you start to experiment with it and look at what you can do, maybe it starts to give you other ideas about how you can actually teach, or how other ways you could use this in a classroom or a teaching environment. The reason we chose NetSupport School was really reliability, and actually, in fact, it worked smoothly. I say all the other ones we tried, we found were very glitchy across our network. They just weren't reliable. I've crashed entire classrooms before now. All 99 PCs crashed simultaneously, blue screened, when that particular bit of software went down. I certainly didn't want that to be happening with this room, and there's nothing close to that. It's worked perfectly every time so far. Helpful.